Has inflation started to ease? That's the question. Two different points of view. One says it may have, one not so quick to say. We'll look at that in this video right now. Inflation, we've talked about it a lot on the show. Has it started to ease? Well, two different points of view that I want to bring to you. One of them being this article that came out today. From chicken wings to used cars, inflation begins to ease its grip. But there's a long way to go before consumers feel much relief or the Federal Reserve hits its goal of a 2% annual price target. And as I've been telling you, this month we're going to get the Fed, we're going to get CPI, I believe on the 13th of December, and we're going to get a Fed decision on the 14th of December to see what the latest rate hike from the Fed's going to be. Do they slow down from 75 basis points to 50, or do they continue at 75? Most say they've got to stop and look around and look at them because they're working on lagging data. They have killed trillions of dollars of wealth. You've seen it in your car payments, your credit card payments. Obviously, we see it in mortgages, the real estate market. I sent out a tweet tonight that I don't think anybody grasps the level to which the real estate market is tanking right now. There are no buyers for real estate. The market is almost essentially dead and could be getting worse if there's something worse than dead. But back to this article. So the author says the price of gasoline is dropping like a rock. Chicken wings are suddenly a bargain, and retailers drowning in excess inventory are looking to make a deal. After more than a year of high inflation, many consumers are finally starting to catch a break. Well, I think you'd have to ask the consumers if they actually think they're getting a break. I don't think many consumers yet feel like they've hit that point where they feel like they're getting a break. And gasoline, for it coming down, yeah, okay, it's come down. But after it went up $4, coming down $1.10 or whatever it is not exactly got people running and jumping for joy. After more than a year of high inflation, many consumers are finally starting to catch a break. Even apartment rents and car prices, two items that hammered millions of household budgets this year, are no longer spiraling out of control. Global supply chains are finally operating normally as more consumers spend more on in-person services like restaurant meals and less on goods like furniture and computers that come from an ocean away. And if you remember the hot job market reports we got last week, that's one of the things that remains very, very sticky for inflation, and that is consumer in-person services. Restaurants, people are spending on things like, and they're getting back out, they're traveling, they're still doing it. Some people still have money from the airdrops we did and from other things, although most things show credit card debt is swelling, household savings is crumbling, is going down. You can look at on Fred. You can look at all of the charts, credit card use going way up, personal savings starting to now go down, starting to really deviate from each other, which again is not good. The cost of sending a standard 40-foot container from China to the U.S. West Coast is now $1,935, more than 90% from a September peak of $20,586, according to online freight marketplace Freightos. The moderation in inflation is just beginning to appear in government statistics. In October, the Federal Reserve PPG, Preferred Price Gauge, the Personal Consumption Expenditures Index, posted its smallest monthly increase in September of last year and is up 6% over the past 12 months. The better-known consumer price index, which of course is CPI, is rising at an annual rate of 7.7%. Down from 9.1% in June. And, of course, that's the reading that we're going to get on December 13th, and we'll see if it continues to fall from 7.7%. The worst inflation is behind us, says Steve Blitz, chief U.S. economist for T.S. Lombard in New York. The question is, where does inflation settle? And that is an interesting question. It's one of the things that the Fed is going to have to really decide. The Fed continues to push 2%, 2%, 2% is our goal. We won't settle till we get to 2%. Well, the idea of 2% may be something that's just in this time, the way inflation has been, it's just impossible to ever get to. So the question is, will the Fed ease up on the idea of 2% has to be the goal and say, well, maybe we'll be happy with 3. We have to, if we get the federal funds rate to 5, 5.25, which most people think they can't go much higher than that, we're going to leave it there for some significant amount of time, then maybe we start to say, well, 2 is maybe not a realistic expectation, and maybe 3 is where we may be happy for at least a first step before we can eventually somewhere down the line get to 2. It'll be interesting to see if the Fed decides to take that route, or if they stand firmly on this, it's either 2% or bust, and we'll raise rates until we have to get there, with possibly everything else going into depression. So we'll have to see. The Fed has been raising rates sharply since March in a bid to get inflation back to its 2% price stability target. Fed Chair Jerome Powell on Wednesday noted signs of progress, but said it was far too early to claim victory. Friday's stronger than expected jobs report, which showed wages rising too quickly for policymakers' taste, only underscored the point. The central bank does not expect to reach its inflation goal until 2025. And there you go. So just what we're talking about. But, you know, the thing is, we have not heard from the Fed yet anything about, well, we may be happy to get it to 3.5%, 3%, and then 2025, 2026, we're obviously shooting for that 2%. But at the cost of what does it come? If they were to raise another 75 basis points in December, at what cost does this mindset that you have to get to 2% come? While we've seen what's going on in the real estate market, and I don't think anybody has a grasp on how bad it is, we see what's going on with oil prices. We see what's going on in energy prices. Yes, there are some things that are still sticky, but if they continue to raise like this and they don't take some pause to look around, wait for the data to catch up, look at Case-Shiller, look at what's going on in the real estate market, as Jeremy Siegel from the Wharton School has said, they are really going to do significant damage if they don't start to take a pause. It'll take substantially more evidence, quote, to give comfort that inflation is actually declining. By any standard, inflation remains much too high, Powell told the audience at the Brookings Institution. Still, there are clear signs of improvement in merchandise prices as consumers resume their pre-pandemic spending patterns. Excluding volatile food and energy prices, good prices rose October by 5.1%, down from 12.3% annually in February. But as good prices begin cooling, pressure is building on services. Rising demand and limited supply, think short-staffed restaurants, has service inflation running at an annual 6.7% rate, more than twice the year-ago figure. The expectation is that goods prices will continue to disinflate, but services inflation will more gradually slow and be much stickier, said Kathy Bostjanik, chief economist at Nationwide. Most of what is happening now with prices reflects development in specific markets or consumers' return to pre-pandemic routines. The plunge in ocean shipping costs by itself has stripped roughly 0.7 percentage points from inflation rates. By making credit more expensive, the Fed has put a major dent in the housing industry, exactly what we've talked about, and I don't think anybody realizes how bad. With mortgage rates briefly topping 7% recently, pending home sales in October were 37% lower than 1 year earlier, according to the National Association of Realtors. But the full effect on the economy of higher interest rates will take many months to materialize, and that's the thing. And that's the thing we keep talking about. Many months to realize. We have barely begun to feel these rate hikes. And you look at the real estate market, and it's like, as I've said before on the show, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. When people can't buy, they're stuck having to go rent. Well, rent, an owner's equivalent rent, is one of the things that has kept inflation high. It's one of the stickier things we've seen. So it's like you prevent people from buying because you're raising rates. You force people to rent, and then because you force people to rent, inflation continues, at least that part of CPI shelter, which is about 33% of the damn reading, continues to be high. So that's obviously the problem. Either way, consumers are unimpressed, and that is a key line in this. Consumers are unimpressed, and that's what I said before. I don't think if you ask many consumers, they feel like that they're feeling some kind of break from inflation. They go to the shopping market every weekend. They go shopping for food every weekend. They're shopping for the holidays. They're putting gas in their car. They're doing all these things. They don't feel like they've caught a break whatsoever so far. Not whatsoever. Less than 1% of those responding to a recent Census Bureau survey said they had noticed prices for goods and services declining over the past 2 months. And 15.7% of households said they find it very difficult to pay their routine household expenses, a figure that is virtually unchanged from the 15.9% who reported affordability woes in June. To be sure, a $26 trillion economy, prices on some products are always falling, even as others may rise. In June, when inflation reached its highest point in more than 40 years, prices nonetheless dropped that month for bacon, window coverings, and men's sweaters, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So it's important not to exaggerate the recent improvement. And I think that's right, because I don't think the recent improvements has been anything to brag about. And again, I don't think people are feeling it at all. With Europe and the United Kingdom in recessions and China hobbled by its restrictive zero COVID policy, global demand for oil has sagged. The barrel of Brent crude now goes for about $85, one-third less than its early March following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. As a result, the national average price of gasoline is $3.47, down almost 8% from 1 month ago. And as I said, it'll be interesting to see. Joe Biden has said that once the Brent crude gets down to about $72, that's where they refill the SPR that they've been draining in an attempt to cap costs and get costs down for consumers. So, as we approach that 72 mark, when do they do it? Do they do it all at 72? Do they have a different plan? We'll have to wait and see. Many retailers find themselves with unusually high inventories, the result of 2 years of herky-jerky supply chains. And we heard this from people like Target and Walmart. But as shipping and raw material costs decline, companies such as IKEA recently began reducing selected prices. Tolga Onku, retail operations manager from Inca Group, IKEA's corporate parent, told Reuters this week he was quite optimistic about being able to lower additional prices in the months ahead. The company did not reply for requests for comment. Walmart also said last month that it'll be looking for opportunities to cut prices. Sam's Club, the company's warehouse membership store, recently cut the price of its in-house hot dog and soda combo to $1.38 from $1.50, undercutting rival Costco. Living with high prices through this year has a cumulative impact on our customers, especially for those that are most budget conscious. And so we're focused on bringing our costs and prices down as quickly as possible by item and category, Walmart Chief Executive Doug McMillon told investors in November. Chicken, cars, and rents provide clues as to why forecasters expect inflation to ease in the coming months, even if it takes years to return to the Fed's 2% target. And again, there's that whole idea of the Fed returning to 2%, and they're going to have to eventually ease off the idea that they're going to get there anytime soon, and that they're going to have to be happy with the steps that we're taking to maybe end the year under 6, maybe get to 4.3 in the beginning half of next year, half into next year, and then maybe into next September, start to thinking about getting into the low 3s. But it's going to be a journey to get back to 2%. So it'll be interesting to see when and if they come off this, it has to be 2%, or we continue to raise rates at the cost of everything else, obviously. Chicken prices spiked near an all-time high earlier this year. COVID restrictions on poultry plants, coupled with an unexpected decline in the number of chicks hatching, say that a couple times fast, successfully led to a drop in supplies as demand was soaring. So this is one take on inflation maybe having peaked. Although, again, I don't think many of you feel like inflation has peaked. And, of course, now there's another take, and this is from a couple days ago, in the American Institute for Economic Research. Inflation is deflating the American dream. Let's take a look at this. The inflation report, the latest inflation report, reveals that inflation is slowing, but it remains at a 40-year high. The stock market rose. A softer than expected inflation rate gave investors hope that the Federal Reserve may not have to raise its target rate quite as fast. A 7.7% increase in prices over the last year shouldn't make people hopeful. Many Americans can't afford soaring living expenses. However, the economy will worsen before there's any relief. Adding to this struggle are inflation-adjusted average weekly earnings, which are down 4% over last year and have been declining for nearly 2 years. This deflating of the American dream is the result of big government policies creating too much money, chasing too few goods. Just the necessity of food is a struggle. Food prices at work and school are up 95%. Eggs are up 43%. Chicken up 15%. Gasoline to drive to the store is up nearly 18%, and electricity 14%. So even making meals at home can rock the budget. To cope with less purchasing power, Americans are not only saving less, they're also accruing credit card debt. This is just what I was saying before. And you can go on to Fred, which is the government's own website of data and charting, and you can see these charts that show credit card use going up, savings going down. We've been talking about it for a while. We printed trillions of dollars. We airdropped all this money to people. Biden's Inflation Reduction Act and all of everything that we've seen come out of this administration has poured gasoline on the inflation fire. We all know where we are. We all know the reason. And now as we're trying to pull dollars out of the system and the Fed is raising rates and trying to unload the balance sheet, which swelled from $3 trillion to $9 trillion over this time, these are the struggles that we have. Even in states with comparatively low cost of living like Texas, people with full-time jobs can't make ends meet for their families and are showing up at food banks for help. Unfortunately, the worst is yet to come. The Fed's meager strategy for fighting inflation hasn't included aggressively cutting its $8.6 trillion balance sheet, what I was just talking about. The balance sheet is only about 3.8% less than its record high in April of 2022 after more than doubling during the pandemic. This overprinting of money affects many markets as those dollars aren't even evenly distributed across the economy, resulting in distorted price signals. The Federal Reserve adding assets to its balance sheet by buying treasury debt, agency debt, and mortgage-backed securities kept interest rates artificially low. And, this is the thing, and most of you have seen me. This is what drives me crazy about the Fed governors. We were keeping it low, even during the Trump administration and President Trump, and one of the many things I didn't agree with him. At the time, inflation was very low. They were keeping them low, and he was still getting on the Fed to cut rates even more to negative. It was their rates were effectively at zero. And he was getting on the Federal Reserve as not doing a good job. And I used to think at the time, how much lower can we go? We can't have negative rates. We need to start raising rates or we're going to get caught on inflation. And as I told you for years, once it's out of the bottle, it's very hard to put back. So realistically, it's what drives me crazy about these Fed governors now is they all come out on TV as they're destroying your wealth. They're here to say, oh, we're here for you. But back in 2021, in September of 2021, August of 2021, when everything was screaming that it was time to raise rates, they all told us that this was all transitory, that this wasn't going to be around, that this wasn't something we had to worry about. There are articles in Bloomberg and CNBC with these Fed governor names, Kashkari, Don't overreact to inflation. It's going to be transitory. It's not going to be here. We're not going to be raising rates. Look at the dot plot. We're not raising rates we may raise one time in 2022 is what they told us. Well, we've had the fastest rate hikes in the history of the country. We've had 4 75 basis point rate hikes in a row. They told us back then they would raise 0.25% one time in January of 22. You can't be more wrong than these people have been. You can't be more wrong than they've been. And now they've destroyed your wealth, my wealth, our wealth, and they continue to do so. They've made it impossible to buy a home. They want you to lose your job. They want the unemployment rate to go to 5%. All because they were so behind the curve when they should have been raising rates, they were not. And this is the result of printing too much money, which only the government can do, creating inflation, ballooning the balance sheet, and not being timely and responsible about what they had to do. The Fed created the currency inflation situation, too much money, which was fueled by Congress's deficit spending and exacerbated by Biden's overregulation, too few goods and services. Now the false boom is busting. Hardworking families and entrepreneurs bear the brunt. To combat the problem it helped create, the Fed is raising its target federal funds rate, which has grown at the fastest pace since Paul Volcker was the chairman in the early 1980s. Volcker understood that the Fed's balance sheet mattered most, which seems to be overlooked by the Fed and many economists today. The Fed's hike of 75 basis points on November 2nd brought the top of the target range to 4%, which was the fourth consecutive 75 basis point hike after rates were held at essentially zero for 2 years. The Fed signaled that it would slow target rate hikes to likely 50 basis points in December, pushing the top rate to 4.5% by the end of 2022. This would be the highest rate in 15 years. The Fed's attempt to correct elevated inflation comes too late to avert the economic consequences of keeping the target rate too low for too long. As a result, Americans are suffering from persistent inflation, higher interest rates, and a prolonged, deeper economic recession. And then he goes on to what we should do, pro-growth policies. Of course, that's not going to happen during the Biden administration. You're still going to get too much regulation. You're going to get too much spending, which is why, of course, the Republicans taking the House can hopefully put a tourniquet, at least on the bleeding of the patient, and, of course, the country being the patient. So there you go. 2 different takes on inflation. I told you this beginning of December will be very important. Producer Price Index will get this coming Friday. Consumer Price Index, CPI, the one we all watch out for, at least now we do. Now, of course, none one knew any of these terms all these years. We never paid any attention to the Fed meetings, CPI, PPI, none of this. Now, of course, we're on the edge of our seat for everything, every one of these meetings. So Producer Price Index this Friday, CPI the following Friday, and then the Fed board meeting starts the next day, and then we get a rate decision hike, I believe, December 14th or 15th, something like that. So it's an important 2 weeks. We'll see which one of these articles, although I think they both have things that are accurate in them, is closer to being the truth. Has inflation peaked? Will we see us come off that 7.7 CPI, continue on down? Most likely still with a 7 in front of it this month, or does it really at some point really start to show the effects of everything that we've done, raising rates, unloading some of the balance sheet, what the bond market has done a lot of the work for the Fed, financial markets have done a lot of the work for the Fed. Does that really start to drop off and we see inflation come down significantly, maybe with a 6 in front of it? I would doubt that this reading. Maybe the January reading we get something with a 6 for December, but December's reading for November, I would think we should probably still be looking for something with a 7. So we'll see which one of these is right. Inflation continues to be a problem, and this is going to be an important month. So, all right, that's going to do it, guys. Thanks. Make sure you like and subscribe, follow the channel, and we'll see you next time right here.